Kody Brown flew across the country to apologize for being a bad father, and on that exact same trip, he made his daughter cut him out of her life forever. He drove an hour and 45 minutes from her front door. He never knocked. If that sentence just hits you differently, you are exactly where you need to be. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to Sister Wives Crew, and do not move, because what I'm about to walk you through is not just another Sister Wives recap. This is the moment the entire 15-year story of Kody Brown finally collapses under its own weight. And we are going to go through it piece by piece, beat by beat, until you understand exactly how one road trip ended a family. Let's go back to the beginning of the trip, because context is everything here. Season 20. Kody Brown, the man who spent over a decade building a narrative around himself as a devoted patriarch. A man who cried on camera about family unity more times than most people cry at funerals, decides to fly to North Carolina. The stated purpose of the trip is reconciliation. He is going to sit down with Janelle. He is going to look her in the eyes. He is going to say the words he should have said years ago. And to his credit, and I'll give him this one moment of credit before I take it all back, he does it. He shows up. He says on camera that he has been a bastard. He acknowledges the pain. He sits in discomfort. For about 45 minutes of edited television, Kody Brown appears to be doing the work. But here is what TLC didn't put in the episode description. Here's what the show didn't lead with. Mykelti Brown Padron, his daughter, his child, someone who had spent years being one of the last publicly warm voices in his corner, was living approximately 90 minutes away from where that apology was being filmed. 90 minutes. You can drive 90 minutes to a good barbecue spot without thinking twice. 90 minutes is not a sacrifice. 90 minutes is an errand. He didn't go. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't send a message through Janelle or Christine or anyone. He drove into Mykelti's orbit, close enough that if she'd been standing on her roof, she might have been able to feel it. And he turned around and flew home. And Mykelti found out the same way the rest of us did. She watched the episode. She saw the travel itinerary. She learned her father had been 90 minutes away from her front door. Not from her father, but from TLC editors, B-roll footage, and a location chyron on the bottom of her television screen. Take a second with that. I need you to actually sit in that. Your father is on a reality television show. You grew up on that show. Your wedding was on that show. Your pregnancy announcements, your arguments, your most vulnerable moments, all of it on that show. And now, in 2026, the show is how you find out your dad was in your state. Not a phone call, the show. Mykelti went on the Cults to Consciousness podcast on April 22nd, 2026, and she talked about it. She didn't scream. She didn't perform outrage for clicks. If you listen to that interview, what's striking is how calm she is. And that calm is more devastating than any breakdown would have been, because it's the calm of someone who has already grieved the relationship. It's the calm of someone who reached their final straw not with a dramatic argument or a door slam, but with a quiet realization while watching cable television on a Tuesday night. She said it was the last straw. Now, let's talk about what makes this particular moment so much more layered than it appears on the surface. Because there are two versions of Kody's defense here, and both of them are damning. Version 1. Kody didn't know Mykelti lived that close. He simply wasn't aware. If that's true, and I want you to really think about this, if that is true, then Kody Brown is a father who does not know where his children live. He doesn't track his adult kids' addresses. He doesn't know their geography. He is so disconnected from the daily reality of his own family that 90 miles could slip by him without a second thought. That is not a defense. That is an indictment dressed up as an excuse. Version 2. Kody knew. He knew she was close. He made a calculation, consciously or subconscious, and he decided the visit wasn't worth making. Maybe he thought it would be awkward. Maybe he thought she'd be cold. Maybe he told himself he'd do it next time. If that's true, then Kody Brown looked at a 90-minute drive to see his daughter and decided his comfort was more important than her presence in his life. There is no third door. There is no version of this story where Kody comes out looking like a man who tried. Either he's a father who lost track of his kids, or he's a father who chose not to show up. You pick which one feels better, because I promise you neither one of them feels good. And this is where I want to slow down, because this contradiction, this double bind, is at the heart of everything wrong with Kody Brown's apology tour. The trip to North Carolina was framed, both by the show and by Kody himself, as growth, as accountability, as a man finally reckoning with the damage he caused. But what does it mean to apologize for absence while actively being absent? What does it mean to tell one woman you should have been there more while simultaneously not being there for another woman who needed you to be? An apology that only travels to the people who have already forgiven you is not an apology. It is a press release. It is reputation management. It is a man doing the minimum amount of emotional labor required to look redeemable on camera without actually doing the work of redemption in real life. Kody said, "I'm a bastard," in North Carolina. Powerful television. Genuinely, as a moment of television, it worked. But words filmed for a camera and transmitted to millions of strangers are not the same as showing up at a door. They are not the same as a phone call. They are not the same as 90 minutes of driving. The most powerful apology Kody Brown could have made on that entire trip wasn't the one he delivered to Janelle with a camera crew present. It was the one he never made to his daughter, who was down the road. Let's talk about who Mykelti is in this story, because I think this is the part that gets underplayed in most coverage. Mykelti is not Christine's daughter in the way the audience tends to think about Aspen or Gwendolyn, who have both been fairly vocal in their criticism of Kody. Mykelti carved out her own lane. She built a Patreon, she did podcast appearances, she talked about her family with a kind of measured warmth that, for a long time, felt like genuine loyalty rather than performance. And critically, she was one of the last voices from the original Three Wives children who hadn't completely torched the bridge to Robin's side of the family. She was the daughter people pointed to when they said, "See, it's not all bad. Some of them still have a relationship with him." That narrative is now gone. When Mykelti goes on Cults to Consciousness and says what she said when she describes that discovery, that moment of watching the episode and realizing her father had been 90 minutes away, she is not just sharing a personal grievance. She is closing a chapter. She is the last broadly positive narrator Kody had left in his original family structure, and she is done. And when the last person still willing to give you the benefit of the doubt stops giving it, that's not a setback. That is a verdict. Now, I want to share something that I think is a theory. I'm flagging this clearly as my read on the situation, not confirmed fact, but I think it explains a pattern that keeps repeating itself with Kody Brown across 15 seasons of this show. I don't think Kody avoids his estranged kids out of malice. I don't think he wakes up in the morning and decides to hurt them. I think something more complicated and ultimately more sad is happening. Every reunion with a child who is pulling away forces Kody to look at a version of himself that he cannot reconcile with the story he tells about himself. And Kody Brown is someone who needs the story he tells about himself to be coherent. He needs to be the misunderstood patriarch, the man who loved his family so much it fell apart around him, the tragic hero of his own narrative. Sitting in Mykelti's living room would have shattered that, because Mykelti would have asked questions. Or maybe she wouldn't have. Maybe her silence would have been worse. Either way, the encounter would have forced him to inhabit the version of Kody Brown that he has been running from for years. The one who let things fall apart. The one who chose Robin's comfort over everyone else's needs repeatedly and systematically. The one who built a cul-de-sac and then watched every family who lived in it leave. Going to North Carolina to see Janelle was, in a strange way, easier. Because Janelle has reached a kind of peace with who Kody is. The divorce was processed, the grief was done. Janelle wasn't going to crack him open in a way he couldn't survive. Mykelti, still in the middle of her reckoning, still figuring out what her father means to her, was the harder door. And Kody Brown has never been great at hard doors. But here's where the tragedy really lives. Because you can understand why someone avoids hard things and still holds them completely accountable for the consequences. Understanding is not the same as excusing. And the consequence here is permanent. Mykelti said it was the final straw. The thing about final straws is they don't grow back. You can't go back to a person and say, "I know that last straw broke everything, but what if I apologized for it?" The entire weight of every straw before it is already there. The final straw doesn't cause the break. The final straw reveals that the break was always coming. It just needed one more thing to make it official. And for Mykelti, that one more thing was sitting in her living room watching her father's travel schedule on cable television. Let's take a moment to do what I think every person who follows this show should do at least once. Take inventory. Not to pile on, not to score points, but to actually look clearly at where Kody Brown stands in 2026. Because I think a lot of viewers are still operating on a version of this story that is several seasons out of date. Meri Brown, 30-plus years. She described their relationship before the official split as a spiritual divorce long before the legal paperwork. She is gone. She is building her own life. She is done. Janelle Brown. She moved into an RV rather than live in a situation that wasn't working. She relocated to North Carolina. She got a spiritual divorce. She is rebuilding. She is, by all accounts, doing well. She is done. Christine Brown. She left first. She said it clearly and without apology on camera. She didn't feel loved. She didn't have a partner, and she was out. She is now remarried to David Woolley. She is done. And now, Mykelti, the daughter who watched, who stayed warm, who gave interviews that suggested maybe not everything was broken, is done. As of April 2026. Done. Of 18 children, Kody Brown's public relationships with his kids have narrowed to a number that you should say slowly if you want people to understand the weight of it. And the narrowing continues. Not because his kids are cruel, not because they ganged up on him, but because absence, repeated and chosen, eventually answers all the questions a child has about where they stand. Now, I want to circle back to something I mentioned earlier, because I think it deserves more time than it usually gets in these conversations. Kody's brand, his entire identity for 15 seasons of this show, was built on one idea. Family is everything. That was the pitch. That was the hook. That was the reason TLC gave him cameras and a production budget and 3,000 hours of airtime. Here was a man who loved his family so much, he built an unconventional structure to contain it. Here was a man who sacrificed convenience, social acceptance, legal simplicity, and public opinion on the altar of keeping his people together. He bought land so they could be neighbors. He designed a house with enough square footage to hold 4 families under one roof. He cried in interviews about the importance of togetherness. He gave speeches at family meetings that lasted longer than most weddings. He tattooed his commitment to the idea of family on every public-facing moment of his life for a decade and a half. And then he was 90 minutes from his daughter's house and he didn't knock. There is a version of Kody Brown who could have turned that North Carolina trip into something real, something that actually mattered. It would have cost him an extra 3 hours round trip, a little discomfort, and maybe a hard conversation. In exchange, he might have kept his last loyal child. He might have walked into 2026 with at least one adult relationship from his original family structure still intact. He might have had something to point to when people asked whether he had learned anything at all. Instead, he flew home. And Mykelti watched the episode. And she went on a podcast and she said what she said in that calm, grieved, utterly final voice that told everyone listening exactly what it meant. Here's what I keep coming back to as I think about this story, and I think it's the most important thing I can leave you with before we get to the end. We spend a lot of time in this fan community debating Kody. Is he a villain? Is he a victim of a lifestyle that stopped working? Is he someone who was manipulated? Is he someone who manipulated others? And I think those are interesting questions, and I've explored a lot of them on this channel. But the Mykelti moment cuts through all of that debate and leaves something very simple behind. Whatever the reasons, whatever the theology, whatever the complications of plural marriage and family structure and television production and fan culture, whatever all of that is, a father was 90 minutes from his daughter's front door, and he did not go. And his daughter found out from a television show, and she said that was the final straw. That's not complicated. That's not nuanced. That's not a situation where reasonable people can look at the facts and reach different conclusions. That's a father who wasn't there. Again. For the last time. The show is called Sister Wives, but the real story, the one that has been unfolding for 15 seasons underneath the plural marriage framework, is about what happens when the people who need you most stop waiting. One by one, they stopped waiting. And now, in April 2026, Mykelti is the latest in that line. She's not the loudest, she's not the most public, but in some ways, she's the most significant because she was the last one still holding the door open. She closed it. And Kody Brown was in North Carolina, on camera, explaining to a different woman why he hadn't been around enough. Here is where I want to hear from you, because this community has always had sharp instincts about this show. And I want to know where you land. If you think Kody Brown can come back from this, if you think there's a version of 2027 or 2028 where he rebuilds even one of these relationships and this story gets a different ending, comment the word maybe. Tell me what you think that path looks like, because I'm genuinely curious whether anyone sees a door still open. If you think this is it, if you think the Mykelti moment is the one that closes the book on the Kody Brown patriarch narrative for good, comment the word done. Because I think a lot of you are there. I think a lot of you have been watching this season and feeling something shift. And this story is the thing that finally made that shift feel permanent. And if you are not subscribed to Sister Wives Crew yet, I need you to fix that right now. Because the next episode of this story, and there is a next episode, there is always a next episode with this family that drops the second something new comes out. And based on what Mykelti said on that podcast, based on what she implied is still coming, there are things she hasn't named yet. There are specifics she was building toward. And when she names them, you are going to want to be here for it. Subscribe, hit the bell, drop your comment below, and we'll see you in the next one.